Welcome to episode 22 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage your global websites. In our last episode, we discussed the lack of awareness of search and digital marketing in the C-suite. If you're a marketing professional, that's one episode you probably need to make sure you listen to. Read some great information in there on how to make yourself visible and show yourself as valuable. In this episode, we're going to be discussing how to survive market site consolidations. So basically website migrations, but we're talking about consolidations, not a single website moving from one domain to a new domain. The same company having different domains or different folders and consolidating them to be more effective. We're doing this because recently there's been a number of companies moving from dedicated market websites, like a German site specifically for Germany with the DE domain, to a global TLD.com domain and in a DE folder for Germany and or /DE folder for Germany and German. There's no one right answer. We're going to get into it. Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing good. And yourself?
Good. So I brought up this idea for today because there are a bunch of companies starting to migrate. I've seen some mistakes people have made. And we also talked about in a previous episode, there was some data that showed actually the opposite, where people were going to CCTLDs. But what have you seen recently? What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a mess, which is good for consultants like us when things are in chaos. But I think you nailed it. I mean, we did see some movement. We have to look up what podcast that was when that report came out that was saying people that had a CCTLD, like a .de website, tended to rank better or be represented. I don't want to say ranked better, because remember, we sort of disagreed with some of the findings. It was showing that those sites that were ranking better just happened to have that DE. So we did see people move to that, especially on the hreflang side. We saw people wanting to sort of use that magic fairy dust. So people were doing that. The other one was, I've seen a lot of people almost doing the opposite because of what IBM did. Now, nobody ever gets, back in the old days, nobody ever got fired for hiring or buying IBM. And so when a big company like that makes a change, people tend to want to replicate it. I mean, I know at least probably a dozen companies that are seriously considering it because of IBM. So IBM basically went from 100 plus market sites to taking a language, primarily a language. So, getting rid of multiple German language websites, consolidating down to a single German language. So they got rid of, let's say, Austria and Germany and Switzerland, and said, we're not going to have these market sites. We want to be able to manage things better. We have a better handle on language. We don't need IP detection to do all this stuff. And so there's actually a fairly lengthy, what's now X, but it was on Twitter, from Brian Casey. I think he's now the head of digital at IBM, going through the why and the how and the what in doing that. So we wanted to talk about this because we also see people, third lever in this is cost. And this has always been one of those caveats whenever UI, Motoko, Michael Bonfields, any of them, Aleda, talk about it, it's always that asterisk of cost. Go with the CCTLD if you can afford it. A lot of CMSs, when you go with the CCTLD, there's a cost.
You double everything. Every tool is a new account because
exactly.
You have a new domain.
Because it's a new license. It's a different entity. And I remember in planning for over the past 30 years with companies, I mean, that ranged anywhere from on the low side to 10K. We ballparked for a lot of enterprises, 150 to 250 per market, 250,000. And then one number I heard from two different companies was all in close to $1 million. I mean, these were big sites. So you've got $1 million per market and people are like, do we need this? So we're seeing people moving from CCTLDs or a .com/folder structure where they were on multiple CMSs down to really one CMS. So, this is typically folder structures on, say, a .com or something like that. At the end of the day, any of these are, going to have a negative impact, potentially a negative impact on SEO. One of the things I want to take a pause and explain what that could be. We're actually working on this guide, for international web mastery, one of our courses, and an actual guide that I've sort of called, I think, against your best wishes, the website transformation guide, because nobody Googles it and nobody calls it that. And care less about things that are findable and Googleable and more about descriptive. But either way, in doing this, we're finding that a lot of people, especially senior people, really don't understand the problem with this. And number one is anything that changes, right? If you change the URL, then it's like if you move your storefront and you're on Main Street today and you move to Elm Street, if you need people to come knock on the door, come to the door and see the sign on the door saying, hey, we're now over on Elm Street, that's the only way they're going to know. And it works the same way with search. So all of that value that you collected, we need to transfer it to the new location. So we need to update all those things. The second is same comes with content. We need, if that content changes. So this is a key thing we're going to talk about today. If we're taking 3 market sites, we're taking the Austrian site, the Germany site, and the Swiss site, Swiss German language site, and we're saying all 3 of these are going away. And we're now going to have one German language site that's accommodating this. And, people not in the know, it's like, it's German. How hard can it be? They speak German. And that's one of the first recommendations, that we want you to do is, create, and we called this, what crazy name did I give it? A cross-market glossary.
Yeah.
And
German is not German in every market.
Exactly. German's not German in every market, or Germany German. And you'll hear people talk about Southern German or High German or proper German or basic German. And, we'll let the German speaking people sort of make those clarifications. But what we're saying is, let's create this matrix, this grid, this glossary to say, this is what we call this in each market. And imagine, if you will, a simple way to do this is take all the keywords, phrases, concepts, topics, whatever the cool kids are calling the element that people use to search for. Because I know I've been sort of criticized as being, a dinosaur for magically using the phrase keywords. So whatever, insert the cool phrase here, and this say, is it the same? And the third one is, what's the search volume for that, right? And we talked about this before. I remember doing a project with Nestle, and it was interesting as we were doing things within the German speaking region, the variances, like one I remember was, Coffee Mate, the flavored creamer that you put into your coffee. And I remember there was a different word, Coffee Mate was a brand name, and even that was sort of, what's the word, germified, or, it's sort of,
localized.
Coffee, it was Coffee Maten or something like that. It wasn't mate, it was adapted. And then, but there was 3 different words, and I'll put them in the show notes because I remember, having to explain how we were going to deal with this. And so then we have to look at, okay, are there any commonalities? And one I remember we were talking about, like a flavor. One of the flavors was apricot, and in Germany and Switzerland, they used the same word, but Austria was different. But they knew what that word was. And so that's what we had to do, is figure out, is the query volume for the fallback word, if you will, or the more common between them, can we get away with that? And I think that's one of the challenges people are facing when they go from 3 market sites. And think of it, if you will, if you had a France French, a Canadian French, and a Moroccan French, and you were falling back to just a singular French language site, are there nuances in French across those 3?
Right.
And as we know, with English,
and
it's huge.
It's nice if you could be perfect, but to be perfect costs you 100 times more than being good enough. So there's always these trade-offs, and like the one is having the language. But let me ask you, how would you? So I'm thinking IBM, mega company, one language for all their German regions. Do they have like, I'm thinking of all of the reasons why people might want to go to the website. Maybe they want to find out where their local headquarters is. So is there like a one German location page with all the locations, or did they have a Germany homepage, like a single landing page somewhere?
Sort of all the above. So we were doing the hreflang for them before and after this. So we weren't directly part of any of the strategic thinking, but that's what they were able to do. Is I remember there was a language, a locator. I think a lot of companies are solving for a in the footer, maybe, we can't even use the word master anymore, a singular or primary, or a primary language. It's like all of our languages, and you can pick, not languages, but locations. You can have a location finder.
Okay.
Um, and then you can do that. So that's typically one of those footer things. And, I haven't looked at it recently. I know there was some discussion at one point that of things that we could potentially do with IP detection. So if somebody's asking for, and what is the question now, right? Because if they're asking Google this question, where is IBM? Is it Munich? Is it Frankfurt? Is it Dusseldorf? I think it's in, what was that? I've been there. It's a town outside of, I think it was not far from the Porsche factory. Anyways, it's you can find that because they can have a main, address or office locator page that, makes findable. But I think you're onto key points. Like, what do people need from that market? How do you deal with, now this gets to bigger questions. Let's say 5 types of software and 20 types of hardware aren't sold in all those markets, which is one of the arguments we always had, people had for having a market site, because you can represent either products that are available or not available in a market. You really have to show what it seems like they've done in the others that I have actively worked with, saying, look, we're going to show it all. And then we can actually say that it's not available, in Switzerland, or it's not available in Austria. And you can do that. It just, again, requires a little more thinking. And I think these are the kind of things that I know Fabrice Canal from Bing is saying. It's like, why do you need, 37 or 45 English language sites when you can just get away with one? What have you done to make them materially different?
Yeah.
Which is the argument. I mean, 3 episodes ago, we talked about this is a challenge for Google trying to deal with this. So to that question, it's going to require some thought. Is there, or are there things we have to bed here? Do we need to really think about our office locator? Do we need to think about our sales team locator? Let's say somebody wants a phone number. Again, you can do some of these creatively. You've got to make sure site search is dialed in. You need to make sure that the pages, that the search engines can get it. Other big things that I think people may struggle with is like leads. If
Yeah.
you only have, one central lead, is your system able to accommodate that? Bill, I can tell you how I ran into this a couple months ago where, somebody said, now that we have hreflang in place, or before hreflang, it's like, oh, we're getting all these leads from Singapore, and, we can't do anything with them, the Australian site. So we just delete them.
Yeah. They don't even know who to send them to if they
Exactly.
wanted to. Yep.
So are they coming into, central database, and then there's a parse or a filter to say, okay, send these to Singapore, or send these to Austria, send these to Switzerland? I mean, these are, operational things companies need to think about. I think from what I've seen, they're representing the entire product set. Some good things, they, except Switzerland, they tend to be, now we have to think about pricing. Right? There's euro pricing, and then, we've got Swiss francs in Switzerland. So that may be a thing. Obviously, IBM, in their marketplace may be different than the marketing website. And I think this is an interesting play. Is this a strategy for, an e-retailer? If you're Columbia Sportswear, are you going to do this? So I think things like that we need to think about that's what we alluded to. The first point I had on my thing to think about is plan for the plan for the plan. Is we got to come in and we got to have somebody thinking about all these possible gotchas, and what's the implication to that. But if we focus just on the migration and the search impact, I think, you nailed it. What are we going to lose? what were things that were only represented in the market website?
Yeah.
If we have a different product, or there's an hreflang problem that the team, and again, full disclosure, I sold hreflang builder and I'm just really an advisor and an evangelist to it, but they've looped me into a pretty complex problem, is trying to do mapping on a site. It's a massive, massive site. I think there's like 300 and some versions, and no two markets, even across language, have really the same structure. And we've talked about this: data consistency, image consistency, because the way they go to market, this one can't give away who it is, but, one has got, it's a 4-pack, another one's got a 25-pack, and another one's got,
Huh.
this volume and that volume. And so, it's really hard from a mapping to put these together. And I think these are nuances we have to consider. I mean, this is a product site that I don't think even could possibly lend itself to being a language only. But again, our other two scenarios, can they bump up to a .com with a folder or a subdomain? Could they? Right now, they're in a mix. They've got ccTLDs and they've got .coms. And
So, I mean, I can't imagine the cost of operating 300 different websites,
oh, it's insane.
and yeah, there's no way you're going to get hreflang working unless there's some really strict guidelines and people follow it.
And that's the
The
key,
structure,
right?
the URL structures.
And that's what we've been advocating on a lot of this, is like, let's centralize some of this. Let's centralize images. And I understand, go to market strategy, product strategy, all of that stuff. But there are some things, if you've got the same product, using consistency and imagery and stuff like that. But let's step back, right? So we talked about our cross market glossary. Do we have that dialed in, right? No matter which way we go, especially if we're going from 3 market sites to 1 language site. If we're going ECT down to folders, that means all the URLs are going to change. And so, the one of the things I've always been an advocate for, and it's another thing that, I stopped working on this for a while because of a couple of criticisms I got to at this idea of creating a value contribution score for all the different assets, PDFs, URLs, images, all that. What is the value of each of these? And I only adopted this mindset to say, okay, I'm going to aggregate. I think at one point we were at 40 potential data points: page views, conversions, search volume, backlinks, internal links, revenue, all of that. It was all these variables we could possibly get. How many words were ranking in the top 10 or top 20 for this? How many featured snippets did we have for content? Like, whatever you can dump into this soup and tie that back to a URL. Because what it did for us was say, okay, all these URLs have a value over 50, meaning they're doing good stuff for me. And then you can track those through the process. Do I have an alternate page when you're doing your, redirect mapping? And one thing about doing these wholesale lift and shift, like going from a .de to a /de for German languages, we can do a wildcard in theory, right? Anything that was on a .de should be an equivalent place on that link. But what if the team launching the language only decides, hey, we're going to do a taxonomy change? That wildcard redirect is going to be a little more problematic
Yeah.
now. So we need to make sure, all I'm saying is, have at least some sense of your most important URLs, and then, sort of shepherd them through the process. One of the things that we tend to do in the database is, as we're building, or the team is building, the from to redirect list, we load it. And then any tier 1 or mission critical URL that doesn't have a destination gets flagged. Because we say, well, where's this going to go?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think
We've had
that's critical.
conversations around the way we do this. I use the keep, kill, redirect, rewrite decision. I don't go through all of I mean, you have a very sophisticated way of doing it. I do it basically impressions, clicks, page views, and backlinks is typically what I'll look at. And you can get that pretty easily by pulling all of that stuff into Screaming Frog if you have a Majestic account. and you just connect it to your different Google Analytics and Google Search Console. But yeah, that's a really good exercise. It's actually a pretty good exercise to do, even if you're not migrating, to see, do you have a whole bunch of crap that you probably don't even need? And
Right.
if you don't need it, why try to maintain it?
And I love that weighting, that the way you broke it down, right? These are URLs we're going to keep,
Yeah,
right? And then these are URLs that we're going to get rid of. If we're getting rid of them, I mean, again, going back to that checklist, right? Here's all the URLs, and then now you've got your, weighting, your action structure, I guess you would call it. What's going to happen to it? Anything that's going to be removed that's got a weighting that you gave it, even from those variables, needs to have a redirect. So we need to say, well, where's this going to go? And then if you're going to rewrite, we're going to redo this page. Then, one of the reasons that I love, what's his name? We'll put it in the show notes. He built a tool. He originally built it was on the Bicycle Shop, and it was a way to combine in Data Studio the different outputs from Search Console, where you could actually get a word and the URL. He's actually built a tool to do this now. Something Oaks.
it's
Noah.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is it Learner? I think it's Noah Learner.
Noah Learner. So we'll put it in the show notes. So he's built a tool that actually does this for you, which is a brilliant way to get that, because then you can say this page is ranking, even if you're using average rank in Search Console, for these words, because if you're doing a rewrite or a modification or a consolidation or trimming, pruning, whatever, fancy word you're going to apply to it, if those words aren't represented, or those topics, and I'm actually in Brittany Mueller's AI course, and yesterday we were working with this really cool entity mapping using Screaming Frog and ChatGPT, and it was finding pages, and we were doing an exercise where we were finding topically related pages that weren't, linked to each other, didn't have internal links. And so, I started, again, the way my brain works, I'm like, oh, wow, man, we can use this post-launch, pre-launch to find things. Then again, if we can bring in this report into a database, I can now say, okay, this is topically relevant now. And then once we edit it, maybe it's not as topically relevant. And therefore, I'm going to lose any performance I had around that topic. Whatever method you use, again, what Bill Scully was just telling you to do, saying if we're going to rewrite something, then we need to make sure that whatever that page was performing for, the rewrite includes it. And another note I had in here on my must identify are template changes. And, if you're going, especially if you're going from CMS-A to CMS-B, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have some sort of significant template change. And I just had one of these with someone where it was a search exercise that was hijacked by UX, who retooled everything from a user experience standpoint and a creative standpoint. They took out all the H tags, they moved stuff around, and they put in all kinds of scripting. And in the end, a template that was really good from an SEO standpoint, not only on Core Web Vitals and page, all those metrics just went like to almost nothing. And so that's why you got to be part of the team, understanding what's changing at the template level. And then the last big one, again, if you took our collective recommendation and you put this in some sort of data set, database, you now can look at your redirects. Are all of the mission critical redirects there? I actually built a tool that when I sold hreflang Builder, because the servers went with it, that I shut down, which was actually my redirect monitoring tool. And I built it because even though people say, yes, we did the redirect, what it would do is I would load we called it the from to report because we're not creative at naming anything. But we would say, what's the old URL and what's the expected new URL? And what it did was it would ping the old URL, take the redirect, log it, and then what it would do, is it a 301? And then we had an extra check, which you can't do in Screaming Frog and you can't do any other way unless you actually write a rule to do it, is the first hop, the actual first output of a redirect to the anticipated page.
I want to remind people of our free Facebook group. where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things, and you can ask any questions you want. You can also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group. Yeah. No, you can't do that. But what I'll do is I'll basically in Excel sort the from to original mapping, and then I'll copy and paste it and run it as a list in Screaming Frog, and then I'll paste the results back in sorted by the list that you input, and that gets you pretty close to see if basically you're looking at did it go to where it's not a check, it's just two new columns you got to look between the two.
But it's pretty
Yeah,
easy.
but you have to do that because I've had people go in, especially in like WordPress, where anybody can add redirects. They'll put in a wildcard redirect, and that is the first thing that gets hit before it goes through the whole list of the 5,000 other redirects, and it just wipes out your whole thing. And it could be changed a single folder. We added an S to a folder, and now everything is broken.
And that brings up a great point. Where are we doing and managing redirects? This is one of these interesting things that you can tell when I'm going to be good. Yeah, let's ask the question. Where are we actually going to manage redirects? And don't take the first answer as the correct answer, and ask multiple people, because I've encountered this a lot lately where the SEO may think it's being done and let's say you're on WordPress, right? And you're using the Yoast plugin to manage that. And what's interesting is even though you're using Yoast, which is done at the web server, it turned out the company was actually managing redirect at the Cloudflare level.
Yeah.
So Cloudflare was doing a redirect. It would come in at the web server, and the web server was catching the destination, and it was sending it someplace else because there was no between what the person managing Cloudflare or Akamai is doing and that. And so you got to ask the question, where do we actually do it?
Yeah.
And the bigger the company, the more likely it's going to be on the front end. There's going to be workers long before it gets to the web server. And you end up with, a crazy amount of hops because, again, if the two are fighting each other. So you need to ask the question, how are we doing it? Do the tests exactly as you said, test and retest. And so that's a key question. More and more people that are using CDNs, use the efficiency of doing it out at the front end like that. Do it at the CDN, and it gets rid of a lot of the kludgy details. Again, if you've got a small business website, you're going to be doing it in WordPress, so that's fine. But the bigger the company, the more complex the company, the more likely you're going to be doing some of these things at the CDN. So you need to understand where it's being done, how it's being tested. Even once you're told it's done and you do the first thing, like the hour after the migration happened, test it at different intervals. Because one of the things that I had as my wrap up point is plan for failure because of humans. And I know we try to keep this positive and kumbaya and, unicorns and rainbows. As this shit happens. Server capacity. I mean, here's the crazy thing is we see people, let's say you're migrating from all these different top level domains, to a language site. Somebody may say, well, great, we can cut off 5 servers. We can reduce our throughput at our CDN. And what happens is now that you've got 4 million URLs that just changed, the engines, the whatever bots, all of them are going to try to retrieve this, especially if you've done your hreflang correctly. That's that signal, as we've said before, for the bots to do the verification, like Google especially. Can your server handle that? And that's a thing that I've not seen on any migration checklist is monitoring. And it's on both sides, remember, both, because I've had people say, Bill, Akamai, we barely touched the throughput. And then but where are all these 500 errors coming from? Well, it's coming from your internal, where you're probably using something, some open source thing that retrieves something from a database and presents it in the page.
And doesn't Akamai only take the last page it found?
The final response. Yeah, the last page, especially if it's cached.
Yeah. Right. So if you've got new URLs, it's not an Akamai.
Yeah, you've got to flush the cache. Well, yeah, that's a good point because again, most people aren't thinking enterprise. One of the great points tests that you need to do, and this is in our guide, pre-plug for the guide, is similar to what Bill, what you were describing is you were fetching all those new pages. And when you fetch all the new pages, you're calling that new page,
Yeah.
which in turn will create a caching in
If
Akamai or
you're doing it
Cloudflare.
on the published site. But another thing that I found when we're talking about redirects is sometimes they'll set up a test site for you to test, and that's where I really like to try and get all my redirects right, so you don't end up having all kinds of crazy stuff in your analytics. A lot of the times when I set up these test sites, it won't be on your Akamai or your Cloudflare, and
Right,
you don't know if there's redirects out there that you don't know about.
right.
And
And
before I
that's why I
forget this
said,
point,
yeah,
whenever you're doing a migration, don't just worry about your pages. You got to worry about all the backlinks that point to your redirects. So you need to get the list of existing redirects as well. Make sure those work when you migrate.
yeah, I'll put a link to an article that we have. I think it's on International Webmaster. If not, I'll put it up there where we talked about aggregating all of that data. Like a great report using Majestic is, the history report.
Mm-hmm.
Look and see all the pages that had links and that, and try to incorporate those into the process. And that's all part of the post migration monitoring. So do it immediately after, to whatever extent the team will allow you to do it. A lot of times, they're like, oh, things are unstable, so don't go banging on the site. At least, again, if you've prioritized your top 1,000 URLs, you can test them because that's mission critical.
Yeah.
That's what you want to make sure is, sitemaps. It's crazy how many people don't update sitemaps. It's crazy how many people don't update hreflang, especially if it's in a sitemap with those new ones. Monitor site traffic.
I'm just agreeing with you. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I mean, it's obvious that I would check it, but it's possible the devs don't realize they need to update it.
Right. And a lot of systems may not have rebuilt it automatically, right? And
Yeah.
so what's nice is having the from to means you've got all the new to URLs, right? And this is a great test. Like you said, I can tell you, I'm probably at about 98 to 90% of the 99% of the time, the dev server, the pre-launch testing dev server URL. I'm not talking about the fake domain they used or the numeric location. The entire taxonomy or URL structure may change at launch or 2 days after because somebody said, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I actually want this folder before that folder. So whenever you have that, having that list again of the most critical URLs, put that up as an XML sitemap because then it's pretty easy for them to rip through 50, 100,000 URLs than trying to dig through 20 million new URLs. So again, seed this, parse it out, have that list, monitor things, right? So I used to have the site migration tool where we did this, and again, I sunset that because we couldn't give it away. I mean, nobody wanted it because they're like, we don't think like this. So in Airtable, I use this lookup. It's similar to like a VLOOKUP where I have the old URL and the new URL. I have all the words. And then what I do is I pull in Search Console report to see, as remember, it's two different reports, old and new. I pull in the new one to see is there a page ranking for those phrases. And the other thing too, what's really cool, you mentioned Screaming Frog. If you turn on the Search Console report and you do two crawls, the old site and then the new site, and you connect it to the API, it's going to give you the status. So what we want to see is all the old URLs dropping out of the index. And it's a great little pivot table to make, say, okay, 60% of our old URLs 10 days post migration have dropped out of the index. And that's great.
Oh,
Then
I've never thought of that. So you could use the old crawl or copy the old crawl and crawl it again to see that.
just pull in the old, yeah, just
Yeah.
have a list of all the old URLs. And then
Right. Right.
remember, it's going in and pulling the status, right? So
Oh, you
because
could do
we're
that too. Yeah,
fetching
you
it,
could just pull the original list of URLs. Right. Okay, and
right.
add that as a
So
list.
wherever you get it,
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is why I like things in a database. It gives me a nice little a variety of test cases, but then I can see that they've dropped out. And guess what? If I've got the destination, the replacement asset, or the replacement page, I can now see, has that been indexed? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really cool. So in Airtable, I'll do a video on this because I have it in Airtable where it actually does a lookup using the from to report. So if URL 123 is now going to be 234, then it really looks to see for this set of words, is URL 234 a page that's actually ranking? Because then it allows me to see if I had any ranking declines exactly at a keyword level or a URL level where. And guess what? Those pages haven't been indexed yet.
Right.
I can start feeding them in there.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's getting creative about this. The beauty is we can use AI, and for all those that are now Python gurus, you can write scripts to do this testing. But think about creative ways. That's really all this is plan for the plan, find out, okay, this is what we're going to do, doing models of where you may lose data. I've had cases where one big one was a company doing a divestiture. So they were selling half the business. And I did a model that showed when they sell half the business, if we don't have the redirects in place. Now remember, they're selling half the company. And so they no longer care.
Mm.
So there's no benefit per se to the old company having redirects because remember, they have to be on their server.
Yeah.
Right. And the IT said that's going to be $50,000 to manage that or maintain that. And we're like, well, okay. So we escalated this to both CEOs. And both CEOs said, okay, then you need to host that for 6 months. You need to manage this for 6 months. So we got it into the acquisition, the divestiture/acquisition contract to maintain that. And that's the same thing. If you're shutting down this .de domain, you still need those redirects to be in place. So you just can't turn that off. There's got to be management happening for that. And again, you can't put up a robots and say, okay, robots text, block it from being crawled because it's now over here, because you need to be able to get to those redirect status codes. Anyways, where I was going with this is that if you build this order of magnitude model, we were able to show that they would be losing about $35 million in lead revenue every month into not quite perpetuity, but at least for the next 6 to 9 months until these pages could stand on their own. And again, this model, that's why I said if you take the priority stuff and, if it's migrating, and maybe I'll share this because I created weighted logic. Like if it's migrated, we may only lose this much. If we don't redirect it, we're going to lose 100% because
Right.
there is no equity. And if we change the content materially, there was like 5 or 6, and it's just stuff. I said, oh, this makes sense to me.
It's what you do. It's how you think.
It's how I think, right? Here's a weighting I would apply to this. If we don't
Yeah.
have anything divided by 0 is 0, right? So if we
Mm-hmm.
don't have anything, if we don't have the data, if we don't have the words, we don't have the content, it's 0. And so it was interesting models to be able to make my case for doing many of these things. And so that would be the other recommendation is plot this out to show the best you can the impact of not doing these things. And what's nice is, it gives you a great I told you show after to say, hey, you didn't do the redirects right. So yeah, these pages aren't, how did Google find it? It's either got to crawl it, follows a redirect, or it gets a sitemap. So if you didn't deploy the new sitemap, if you didn't put in redirects, then now we're at the mercy. And oh yeah, we decided to do a fully enabled React JavaScript site. Let's say it takes 2 months to get it all crawled. We're at a disadvantage on every one of these. But if you,
Yeah.
have all these things in place in the plan and in the action and in the testing, we should be pretty good. So that's sort of, it in a nutshell. I'd like to just close by saying, look, the more you plan, the more you demonstrate the risks of not doing the things that we just talked about. Whatever one of these things that's happening to you, just think about it and fall back on your experience with migrations. Build test cases, build your models, and then hope that you can get people that are willing to make sure all the stuff is aligned when you actually do it.
Mm-hmm. One thing we talked about a few episodes ago is when you're doing this, you want to make sure you have your hreflang in place. Otherwise, these pages may be considered a duplicate and you get caught in that, what was it? the abyss, or what? I forget the word.
the abyss, the black hole.
Black hole, yeah.
Google's
You get
black hole.
your pages end up in the black hole of being a duplicate and never crawled again and never being pulled out of that because you
And
hadn't
that's
set up
critical.
the hreflang.
Again, let's reemphasize this point, with what Adam and them were talking about is, again, like I just said, if you don't have a sitemap, if Google simply encounter that page, right? And especially if you're not, I'm not going to say this because it'd be misconstrued. If Google wasn't able to understand your hreflang for whatever reason, and it finds this page, because of the way they process content, it will be flagged as a duplicate. And which is why we want, make sure if you're using tags in the page, they're at the top,
Hmm.
especially if you're using JavaScript. They should be, at the top of the head tag so that it gets it before any script can potentially break it. Then it sees it, and that triggers Google specifically to go and find these new pages because it's probably crawling your other pages. And hreflang XML sitemap, I also recommend this for people that are doing a big change like this. Even if you got it in the page, you can still do an XML sitemap hreflang because that gives all of it, all the connections at the point of ingestion. So then Google's got that signal in their back pocket, if you will, to know when they actually come and fetch the page and index all the goodness on it. Oh, okay. Yeah, we know this page has a purpose. So great point, Bill, of that. And check out that episode. It was the Google themselves talking about mitigating and minimizing the appearance of duplicate content. Anything else?
I think that covers it. So, a couple things we want to reiterate here is you need to develop a detailed migration plan. List everything that you're moving. I really like the idea that you have this glossary for each region. You need to conduct the audit before and after, set up all of the redirects before and after. I personally like to test in a test site before and then even test again in the staging environment. And then once it's launched, you want to test again. All of those little things. hreflang, we're talking about international here, so hreflang needs to be in place at the time of the migration. That, hopefully helps eliminate the risk of rankings lost, broken links, downtime and performance, all that kind of stuff. How about you, Bill? Anything else?
No, it's it. Just, the more you plan and the more you can document it, the more you can put sort of numbers, order of magnitude of impact of things, the more chance you have of getting people's attention and minimizing some of the problems with doing this.
Good. Yeah, and if you can, it'd be great if you could do that video with your Airtable. I'd be really
Yeah.
interested in seeing how that works. And I want to remind everybody, if you like what we're doing here, please find us on social media, International Web Mastery. Leave comments. We really enjoy those. We also have a free Facebook group where you can jump in, ask questions specific to the topics or any other topic. And we have courses where you can go and take a course. There's questions. Some of the courses are free. Some of the courses are paid and in real detail done by the world's expert, Bill Hunt, in these topics. Any specific course you want to bring up, Bill?
The one that we just put up, and I just added two little mini modules, was sort of my epiphanies. It's a free one. It's just a bunch of my sort of rantings and ideas around a variety of things. These were things that radically changed my thinking over my career. It actually came from a keynote I did where I had people, it was like, I don't know, 15, 17 years ago, that a couple people found and asked me questions on. So I broke them into, I think I'm up to 12 or 17, something like that, epiphanies. Some are a little long, but check out the listing. And yeah, I think that's an interesting one. Again, it's free. And then we have, I think our business case could be applicable to what we just talked about, ways of building a business case. That's a paid one, but it's pretty robust. While it talks about hreflang, I think we probably need to rebuild it to where it's more broadly business case. But it's search and replaceable with hreflang, but it is tuned to that. But check that one out. I think that's another one that we're really, really proud of, that we've gotten some good feedback on. So yeah, and definitely we've got some free ones. The demystifying hreflang, which is a popular one.
I'm
And we've
always
got
sharing
the
that. People,
yeah.
people ask, in groups and they ask questions and I basically point them to that. It answers the questions every time. I give them the answer and then I say, if you want to learn more about hreflang, check this out. But yeah, there's so much. Well, first, there's so much old stuff out there that is no longer applicable. Then there's stuff where people get it half right because they're not experts in it and they're sharing answers that aren't correct. And you've really done a great job at demystifying all that stuff.
Thank you. That was the goal. Make it
Yeah.
simple and easy and debunking. And so, yeah, check those out.
Okay. International Web Mastery. Check them out. Thanks, Bill.
Yep. Thanks. Have a good one.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.